Howdy folks, welcome to the first episode of Period 6's Gold Mining and Gold Geology 101 series. This is the first episode that we're going to focus mostly on general mine terminology, going over what it means, what the terms mean, how they differentiate, and show you some photos of that as well from our explorations and our mines themselves. It's hard, if not impossible, to get all these into a walking exploration of things. Like if I had one mine that had all this, it would be fantastic, but it probably would take 20 minutes to get through the whole thing. So we're going to do this kind of quick. I'll put the photos in there so you can see what it looks like in real life as well. These photos mostly come, hopefully most of them are coming from our mines or our explorations. There might be a few here and there that we can't get, especially when we get to the timbering series, because we don't have a lot of timbering, or a lot of mines that we've seen timber in. So we'll be going from that forward. But here we go. This is a general view of a theoretical mine. The outside line here being the hillside. So let's start at the bottom and work our way up, and then we'll get to the interior. First, there's two basic entrances, or three basic entry points into a mine. The first is an adit. This is the little side thing to come in that you most recognize as the little, you'll see the photos here in a second. An adit can look a little different depending on how it's set up, what the rock looks like. It might be timbered, it might just be open. Now the adit generally is considered the entire main level of the mine if it's perfectly horizontal or relatively horizontal. They do slope a little bit for drainage, which we'll get to in a minute. But then the opening of an adit is always called the portal. So you'll see different varieties of portals there. They can be timbered with lagging. We'll get to that. Don't worry about what all this means later. But they can be timbered. It can be concrete. It can be just general open rock. That's kind of what you see in an adit. It's that It's the kind of the three-sided kind of shape there with various supports if it's necessary for the rock. Ours that we're working on, the Green Mountain mine, doesn't need support right now. It's fairly competent rock. We'll get to what that means later on. But next up, you've got an incline shaft. Anything that comes in at an angle, like this one shows, and that we have here in the photo, that is an example of an incline shaft. It's not straight down, direct vertical, kind of in an incline. You can see why they kind of can be dangerous, showing that some of these, if it was low light or you weren't paying attention, they're real easy to fall into. If you weren't aware of what's around it. All the old mine workings have been gone. You can see that's a fairly easy hole to end up in the bottom of in a hurry. It happens fairly frequently in old mine country. I know of one up near Dewey, Humboldt, that you can probably drive the average truck into. It's right on the road. I mean, you're talking from here, the average size of a good sized picnic table. It's right on the road, an old dirt road. So it'd be really easy to fall into. It's fairly well marked though, but regardless, incline shaft. Actually, I think that one's a true shaft. Anyway, so incline shaft here. Then we have the true shaft. Now, usually the shaft will sit a little bit above ground level. That's got usually rock or timbers, concrete around it. That's what's called the collar. The collar of the mine keeps the edges from falling in, caving in, which is what the last thing you want to have happen in any mine. You'll see that the collars can kind of become ground level, kind of work up to them. There's a couple mines I can think of around the Unita mine area, where the collars completely collapsed and it looks like an antlion now. Those inverted pyramids there, or I guess the cone shape. Now that you get on the edge of it, those edges are very, very unstable. You can slide into one. I did once and had a rear end full of cactus thorns and some in a very not nice place. It took weeks and months to get all the thorns out. It was a horrible experience. So just be careful around the edges of mines. They're waiting for something to fall into them, really. They're evil like that. So we have shaft, we have incline shaft, we have adit. Those are the kind of main things you want to look at here. So what's some of this other stuff I've got on here? Well, any rock that you take out of a mine that's not going to be used is usually thrown in an area called the mine dump. This can be right around the shaft, it can be right around the incline shaft. It can be often a little bit from it. A lot of times you can see a mine due to the discoloration. There's a lot of rock outside the mine. Nothing usually grows in it because there's no real soil there. It's just barren rock. It's been thrown out. A lot of people call these tailings piles. It's incorrect. It's the mine dump. Anything that wasn't used is a mine dump. People will say, oh, well, there's more gold in that tailings pile. No, if it wasn't meant to be, if the miners left it behind and had no intent to process it, it's still a dump. It doesn't sound as attractive as a tailings pile, because tailings, ooh, there might be some gold in there. But there's just as much gold in mine dumps, and tailings piles are processed. You usually would be the cyanide. It might just be old stamp mill tailings. But most people call, you know, it's mislabeled a lot, or just because it sounds better. It's really a mine dump. I call it personally. I call them tailings piles all the time myself too. So what are we looking at here? Here is an example of where a incline shaft has caved. Now there can be complete collapses in mines where you can't get past it due to the wall rocks falling, the side rocks falling in, and we'll get to what that's called here in a few minutes. It can be it can be partial, where you have an old piece of shaft that's collapsed. If there was another piece here that had collapsed in. Basically, it's any blockage that wasn't intentional, it's caving. It's a bad situation to be in, especially if there's no access point. If you're back here and there's no other way to get out, you're not having a good day. So we've got the shaft, we have caving situation here. They use some photos there. I think the one I'm going to show you there is in the Monarch mine, part near Wickenburg. It's partially caved, and there's actually another piece of an exploration winze. No, that's a raise there. That's collapsed in on itself. So what is a raise? A raise is any portion in a mine that goes up from a level. If it's exploring up, it's a raise. So if you're on this main adit level here, this raise, or this area going up, is a raise. If it was going down, which is the opposite, we've got a winze. The winze, W-I-N-Z, raise. And it really just kind of looks like a matter of perspective if you're exploring, but from where you're at. This could have been a winze that broke through the bottom level, and now is just a passageway, crosscut is what it's called. If I go across, you got a crosscut here, it's a crosscut shaft in this case, winze. You see the photos there. The ladder, the steel ladder going up, is the George Washington mine. We call it the Old Dollar Mine in a couple of videos. That one's completely worked out. That one's got 4 levels in it. 1 winze, we never got down into it. The main adit level, and then 2 upper levels. The flooring between the levels up there is only about 3 foot thick. It's pretty dicey, not really stable, and that won't last for a couple more seismic activities where it decides to die. So we got raise up, winze down. This pile of rock here, in some mines, and you'll see it in the Green Mountain adit, that there's backfill. And a backfill is any area that you put waste rock in. That can be anything that you don't want to move out. It could be rock you've brought back in. In this case, I'm showing it as a dam for the water here. We'll get to that in a minute. But you can backfill for damming, you can backfill for support. We'll get into that in the timbering video, what the backfill does. In our case, we have natural erosion that did some backfill in the adit portal that we have to dig out, and we've been digging out. You can see what, if I show you the photo of when we first found the portal, what it looks like. Obviously, there wasn't a lot there to see. And then after a couple series of digs and moving some brush out, now you can see how far we've moved back into cutting the erosion dirt out that's actually fallen back into the mine, backfill. And there's also backfill in the mine right past our winze. The one I mentioned about, there's so many rat turds. That's a big fill. It's all the winze material they piled up and made backfill out of that. So moving back down, we'll stay on the same sub-level here. Water falling on us out of the roof here. So a mine, the term is making water. How many gallons does it make per hour, per minute, per day? Even in desert in Arizona, if you hit water, it can be a pretty good thing, or it can also be the end of the mine. Depending on how much water it makes, you might hit an aquifer, and they did it in the what's the name of it? Up there on Rich Hill. I've forgotten it. It's with an O. It's a huge one too. Anyway, they all use the water for basically the mine camp for processing the ore. There was no. They're bringing water in from 4 miles away from Antelope Springs, so it's a huge pain in the butt. So how much your mine makes can be an issue, or it cannot be. Depends. This little cut here is known as a sump. Just like you have in a sump, if you're in the northern climates where you have basements, you might have a sump well, sump pump. Same principle applies here. All it is an area for water to flow to. In this case, what we've done is we backfill an area to create a dam, and that water now is running into the sump where the red line will pump that water out, either for disposal or for use in the processing facility, or in some cases they actually make little stock tanks, little things called guzzlers, place for wildlife to drink the water. As long as there's not a lot of bad chemicals in that rock, you're in a good shape. As long as it's not running through tailings or through old mine dump, water's usually fairly decent. I wouldn't necessarily drink it without testing it, but you could in an emergency. Moving along, we'll get back a little further back in the adit. These little gaps here, little holes, I guess you could say, in the mining world are called bugs. They're VUGS, Victor Uniform Golf Sierra. They're natural holes in the rock that formed when the surrounding rock cooled after the deposition of the mineral-bearing rock. And we'll get into that too in Geology 101. But little bugs like this, they can be in there. So you hear me talking about bugs and showing these little holes in the rock. They aren't cut by human, they're natural. In the very beginning of the Green Mountain adit one, the major gold claim one, there's actually a bug on the north side and down the bottom. It goes about 44 inches down that we measured out. That one's really unique, so I'm really wanting to get into there, explore that, and see what that's caused by. That might not be a natural formation due to cooling of the rock and actually being a gas pocket. That actually might be due to geology, either the thrust or slip, some kind of fault in there. Something's going on there. It's really unique. So I think there might be actually a bedding plane that's split open a little bit, and we'll get to that in geology as well. Moving on past the bug. This is what's known as if you take a big area and you mine it all out, take a lot of ore out of the area, it's what's known as a stope. It's a big area. Also, some people call them galleries, but their proper term is a stope. You'll see some photos here. They come from the Columbia mine in Martinez Canyon down in Arizona, down by Florence. So there's large stopes there. And we'll see these videos, see those photos again when it comes to timbering, because those actually show some interesting timbering techniques that you'll need to know about. So those are large, basically just large mined out areas in the mine. They're supported in various ways, we'll get to. But any large area like that is referred to as a stope. Now you can actually, this one just shows the ending of the stope. You can continue mining down that way, any direction. There are some, there's a lead mine, I want to say up in Utah, that the stopes are cathedral-like. They're monstrous. And when you look at the video from, I think it's from the 30s or the 40s, it's a real old video, and you're seeing like, oh, this is a pretty good sized mine. And then you see little people down there walking around, you're like, oh my, it's like they're ants. So they're almost ready to go to that. It's amazing the size of it. That was in the 30s and the 40s, big lead mine. Now, if a stope is worked out and it breaks through the surface, it's called an open stope. This can be on purpose, and it can be due to subsidence when the ground falls down after it loses support, loses its tensile strength or its rigidity. So you can have open stopes on purpose, and you can also have subsidence stopes. Those, you'll see some of these down in the Globe, Miami area. There's some, I think the Copper Queen down south has some fairly good subsidence cracks in it. They're highly unpredictable. You don't know how far down they go. And a lot of these subsidence cracks, or the subsidence stoping, can come from, or subsidence cracks resulting in stopes opening up, are due to lower levels collapsing in the mine. Mines are not meant to be permanent structures. I read an old article from the 30s where a gentleman who took over a mine mentioned that they braced it for something that they would expect to be working in for 10 to 12 weeks. Some of those stopes are still open, they're still braced, but they were not planning on them being open 50 years, 80 years. So when you go into these, they're waiting for something like a fly to land on it to collapse. They're very dangerous in some extents, instances. Water makes it worse. A lot of my mines I've been into, I'm always leery about water in mines for lots of reasons we won't get into today. That's pretty much kind of what I wanted to go over. So we got winds, rays. This is known as the main adit, sump. We got some caving going on here. We've got shaft. Now a direct shaft like this can be multiple compartment, just not necessarily just a square. There's another photo here, I might have already not added it yet, that shows, you can kind of see the split where the panels down going down the wood. We'll talk about what that is later too. Those panels going down split that mine shaft in two pieces. One's for moving ore in and out, like they're called skips, basically the mine cars that are used, that are built a little different, that's bringing ore out of it rather than transverse down and back and forth. That skip goes up one side, and then the ladders and electrical, air lines, water lines, whatever you need to actually work in the mine, that goes down the other side, and that's the ladder way or the man way. So they're usually split up. Man way is about 1/3 the size of the actual service part of it, so you'll see that. Let's see if I got anything else here. No, I pretty much got it all so far. The only thing I really didn't show here is what's known as a hanging wall and a foot wall. Now, the hanging wall and the foot wall can be directly on top of each other. Like, I have a photo here showing the hanging wall and the foot wall. In this case, the hanging wall is directly above. So the rock that's in between this plane here and this plane here is only keeping the hanging wall from falling, crushing on the foot wall. They can also be at an angle. In Green Mountain Mine, the hanging wall and foot wall, let's see, the hanging wall is to the north, and they're at an angle like this, like 75 degrees off vertical. But basically, one sits above the other, and the rock that you're removing, it keeps them apart. That's when you brace the mine to keep those spread out. But that's it for the day. That's it for our general mine terminology. If you have any other questions, comments, if you figured out if a pickle is indeed a vegetable or not, in the pickle state, let me know. Other than that, we're good. Next one up, we'll be going over some timbering. Basically, it'll be a ground support. Going over what supports, it's an introduction really, from anything from stacking rocks together to keep the roof up, what the terms are there, to all the way down to, we'll touch on square sets, because square sets are really just amazing engineering feats when you look at them. So we'll touch on square sets. We'll get a little bit more about the terminology as far as what the various parts of a mine are called. Well, let's do it right now. We got time. You can go anywhere? I got nowhere to be. All right, so in a mine, let me get this erased. Now, looking at a portal again. I have a photo of it there so you can take a look at it. Coming back to me though, portal. So we got the entryway here, ground here. We got that timber around holding up. So the bottom of a mine here, where you're walking, is called the sill. S-I-L-L, sill. The sides of the mine are always referred to as the ribs. We got the ribs here. Now, sill, ribs, top is either referred to as the roof, which makes sense, or it can be referred to as the back. Either one works, roof or back. What's confusing for some people is when you talk about the back of the mine, they might think you're talking about the farthest point away from you, or where the actual mine, where the ore extraction is being taken place. That's different. That's called the face of the mine. The face is the last point is being mined, the point at mining. There can be multiple faces in working faces in a mine. Dozens actually, depending on how big the operation is, or I can imagine. I mean, there really is in some very, very large mines. But anything that's working is called the face. So roof, back, the top, which you hit your head on, ribs, the sides, right here, right there, and the sill is the bottom, just like your windowsill. And that will get you ready for the next series on ground support. Until then, folks, we'll look at that, and then we'll start probably some basic geology. We'll be looking at some rocks and going over some basic geology terms. They're going to focus pretty much on Arizona in my area, porphyry deposits. We'll talk a little bit about epithermal deposits, how they form clustering, shear, bedding plains, veins. It'll all make sense, and that way you can really apply it to see what we're looking at inside the mine, rather than me just flying around through there and kind of showing you pictures. I mean, showing you minerals and cracks. You'll understand why everything's there, why I was so excited in that first video. Until then, folks, next time we'll learn you something. Bye-bye.